So welcome. I am Helen Graves, an instructional designer, brand new to College of the Canyons. And I'm delighted to be here with you today. We're going to be talking about universal design for learning. And let me ask, does anybody know, and it's kind of a rhetorical question, anybody know what happens in your brain when you learn something new? What happens is the wiring in your brain literally changes. That new idea or behavior or calculation or vocabulary term has never happened in your brain before. And so there's no neural pathway for it to follow. A new pathway has to be created. Most of us, I think, without thinking about it, kind of assume that all brains are the same. But neuroscience is now telling us that that definitely is not the case. Turns out that every brain is wired differently because we are constantly learning in one form or another. Our brains are constantly rewiring, reorganizing, and restructuring. And these changes are unique to every individual, even when they're in the same learning environment. Now, why is all that important? Because if every brain is wired differently, it follows that every brain learns and comprehends differently. So today we're going to take a peek under the metaphorical hood of universal design for learning as a way of supporting differently wired brains and learning differences. Research shows that the way people learn is as unique as their fingerprints. Every learner brings their own background, needs, skills, and interests, as well as their unique set of neural pathways to the task of learning. Instead of taking a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching, it really makes sense to vary your content delivery methods and to give learners options in order to accommodate those differences, at least to some degree. And that's what the principles of universal design for learning are all about. The term universal design actually comes from the architectural context. Buildings are designed to be flexible and to meet the needs of all kinds of users. Initially, those adaptations were done to address accessibility, but we have since realized that these design accommodations help everyone. Curb cuts are used by people in wheelchairs, but they also make life easier for people with strollers or people on bikes or with canes. And captions are mainly intended for hearing impaired people, but I know I use captions when the speaker has a heavy accent or if I'm in a noisy environment. So UDL considers the what, the why, and the how of learning. And similar to architectural universal design for learning looks at how to minimize barriers and maximize learning for everybody. The old saying goes that there's nothing new under the sun. So I'm not going to tell you that all of the strategies and methods incorporated in UDL are earth-shakingly new. It's really more that UDL provides an umbrella for these ideas, a new paradigm for thinking about and structuring our learning. I'm also going to say there is a lot to UDL, more than I can cover in an hour. So this is really kind of the nuts and bolts. And then at the end, I'm going to give you a resource idea if it's something you want to explore more about. So the core idea with universal design for learning is to add responsiveness to your teaching by offering students multiple options within three broad categories: engagement, representation, and action or expression. We're going to take a closer look at each of those. Now, I'm going to tell you in advance, put on your innovative thinking caps, because after I give an explanation and a few examples for each of these, then you're going to have a chance to just do a quick little brainstorm for an idea or two based on your specific content. Ready, set, go. So the first category is engagement. Learners differ widely in the ways in which they can be engaged or motivated to learn. I'm sure you've come to realize that with your students. Some people are excited by novelty and spur-of-the-moment experiences, while others prefer a clearly designed structure and sequence. Some learners prefer collaborative activities, while others are more productive working alone. really varies, all kinds of things. You can foster motivation and engagement by structuring learning in a way that provides choice and autonomy. As an example, it's probably not appropriate to offer choice in the learning goals themselves, but it is often appropriate to offer choices in how those objectives might be reached. And you could do that by varying the level of perceived challenge. You could vary the context or the content that's being used for practicing and assessing skills. You might vary the tools that are being used for information gathering or production. And you could vary the sequence or the timing for completion of subcomponents of a task. A couple of examples. To vary the level of challenge, for example, you might have a standard level of assignment and then also offer a problem-solving level. Not necessarily worth more points, but it's available for learners that are motivated by having a bigger challenge. To vary the context, you might offer 2 or 3 relevant prompts within a single discussion and have students pick the one they want to respond to. To vary sequence, you could look for ways to chunk those bigger goals or projects into smaller subtasks and then give students a choice in the order in which they're completing them. Now, I'm totally making those up, but I think you're getting the idea. One of the most powerful ways to spark motivation and interest in an educational context is to make really clear the relevance and usefulness of the learning. So you want to choose activities and sources of information that are personalized and contextualized to your students' lives and experiences, and that are culturally and socially relevant. So you might incorporate current events into your announcements and activities. If the task is, let's say, critical analysis, you might say, pick your favorite TV commercial or your favorite song or your favorite whatever, and describe its societal impact. You're giving them the structure, but they're having some choice within that structure. Or if you're providing a list of examples of something, take the time to include current or diverse options. So in a list of authors, you could include men and women, white and people of color, famous and obscure, straight, gay, trans. You're just thinking about what are all the ways my students might show up. How can I make this represent them? In a chat, I'm actually going to share 2 different compilations of open license diverse images that might be helpful as you're putting together things. The first one is from @ONE, which is the other organization I work for. It's the PD arm of our system. And Michelle Pacansky-Brock has compiled a couple of, some resources on diverse images. And then the other is one I just found in a Google search that had some different resources for diverse images. So openly licensed images. So that can be a way to begin your exploration with representing cultural and social relevance for your students. One of the key factors in losing motivation is the inability to recognize their own progress. Especially important is providing formative feedback that's going to allow your students to monitor their progress effectively and to use that information to guide their future efforts and practice. And you can do that by asking questions that guide the self-monitoring and the reflection. You might prompt students to clarify for themselves what's the type of feedback or advice that they're looking for. You might provide feedback that's informative rather than comparative. And you can use things like assessment checklists, scoring rubrics, and multiple examples of annotated student work or performance examples so that students are better able to understand what you're looking for and then match those expectations. Also within this category is the idea of 21st century skill set that's got communication and collaboration. It's always been important, but it seems like nowadays it's even more important that students really know how to communicate and collaborate effectively in a variety of contexts and with a number of different people. And so UDL recommends fostering this skill set in a way that supports autonomy and choice by creating cooperative learning groups that have really clear goals, roles, expectations, and responsibilities. So you're not just saying, go be in a group, you're really helping guide them as to how to be in a group. By providing guidelines in when and how they might ask peers or you for help. By encouraging opportunities for peer interaction and support. And in Canvas, we've got peer review and collaborations. You could do peer tutors. It's a variety of things you might think of. And then consciously setting up communities of learners that are engaged in common interests or activities like study groups, or, if they want to explore more about a topic, you can find a way to create a little structure so that those students can find each other and work together. Okay. We remember better when we actually apply new learning. So now it's your turn to just noodle with these ideas. No pressure. I just want to give you a chance to start thinking about what we just talked about in the context of your course and your content. So think about a specific topic or a specific piece of content or activity in your course. How might you provide greater choice and autonomy? How might you make the relevance more clear? How could you increase the collaborative nature of it? And when you have an idea, go ahead and unmute and just give us your thoughts. Again, it doesn't have to be well thought out. We're just kind of brainstorming together because your idea will spark you and it may spark somebody else. So I'm going to take a sip of water while you're thinking. You didn't know I was going to make you work, did you? Should have said it in the description, huh? Anyone have something that's coming to mind? It's okay if it's not. Just wanted to give you a chance to start the creative process.
I'll try. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm Joan Washington, and this is my second semester with the college, and I teach Business 100.
Hi.
And hi, how are you? How's everybody? There is a business case analysis that's required in the Business 100 courses. And what I did last semester, since it was my first semester teaching this, is along the way, I would tell each of the students that they were assigned to open the lecture with articles and information pertaining to, we did this progressively as a group, pertaining to their project instead of me lecturing all the time. So I tried to do that to get feedback, because it's sort of difficult to look at little black boxes and try to get everybody to participate. Another thing was every week I assigned one of my students as a moderator for the chat, since the teaching via Zoom was new to me because I started in a classroom. So if someone raised their hand, the moderator would get my attention, and I have rules for that. Is that sort of along the lines of where you're trying to go?
Well, it's certainly, I think, both of them suggest the idea of autonomy and giving students choice and more agency in what's going on in the class. Yeah, sounds like you're thinking along the right lines there. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Yeah, Rob, go ahead.
I guess it's more of a question, because I teach photography and history of photography. So they're very separate type of things. History of photography is just like any history course, really. But my photography classes that have projects and they shoot photographs, I give them a lot of choice and autonomy. I guess my question is how much is too much? Because a lot of times they want, well, give me a parameter. They get freaked out. As an artist and trying to teach art and, art type of things, you want them to think out of their own boxes, and they get so wrapped up in a box. They want a box and they want the measurements, and it goes the other way too.
Yeah, and it does. I mean, and when you have so many different people, some are going to be on one end of the spectrum and some are going to be on the other end of the spectrum. Off the top of my head, two things come to mind. One is to, and you probably are already doing this, Rob, clarify for them why you're giving them choice, because you don't want them to be boxed in. And part of this field is really learning to tap into their own creativity and decision-making and, you know, all that kind of stuff, so that they understand the context for it. And then the other might be along those lines of what I mentioned before, different levels of challenge. So maybe you have among your choices, one is a bit more structured and the other is way more open-ended for the students, that's really what they want and what fires them up. And the ones who need a bit more structure, they can choose that one and still be able to meet the goals of the assignment.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that makes some sense. So give them like a choice B. Okay, here, do this, or
right,
do whatever you want.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there's always parameters, but my parameters are pretty wide for them, and it freaks some of them out.
Right. So a different level of challenge. Yeah. Great.
I have another question.
Yeah, Joan.
On your slide where it says, how can you provide a greater choice and autonomy? Can you just give us a little detail in what you mean by that? Was it similar to what we were talking about, or something?
Yeah, it's without getting, I mean, there need to be structures and guidelines because you have to get them to a certain goal. And yet within that, what are ways that I can give students choices, ways that they can be directing their own learning so that they have that sense of autonomy, which is not only motivating, but it's also a skill that all of us need when we're out in the world, in our real lives. If I have to have somebody always telling me what to do, I'm not going to be a very effective person. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I have another question about the collaborative effort. I found that to be a challenge.
It is. And okay. a later webinar, we're going to talk in more detail about groups and that kind of stuff. Today, I really don't have time to go specifically into that. It can be challenging, and it's different in an online environment than it is in a face-to-face, but there are definitely ways to bring that aspect into the learning environment. Okay, great. All right. So we're going on to the next category, which is representation. Another way brains are wired differently is in the way that learners perceive and comprehend information. Now, there may be obvious differences of perception, like with a visually impaired student, but other dissimilarities like dyslexia or language or cultural differences can also impact students' perception and comprehension. The modality can be important as well. Some of us grasp information quicker or more efficiently through visual or auditory means rather than printed text. I'm actually the opposite. I would almost always rather read than listen. Everybody's different. So you want to think about providing options for the representation of your content. Here's one example of how to do that from Suzanne Joachim, who is an instructor I've worked with from Butte College. For this particular learning topic, she offers 3 different text options, as well as a number of video options. The students at the top are told what the goal is. They need to be able to answer the questions that she's giving them on a study guide, and then they get to choose which of these learning materials they want to access to accomplish that. Clearly, this took a while to compile, so it's not something you're going to turn around and do tomorrow, but just begin thinking, how can I vary or include different ways of delivering content so that I'm meeting needs of students who prefer text or who prefer video or who prefer audio or whatever it is. Sorry, I get distracted, but thank you for doing that, whoever did it. Sound is another aspect, and it's a particularly effective way to convey the impact of information, which is why sound design is so important in movies and why the human voice is particularly effective in conveying emotion and significance. However, People with hearing disabilities, people who need more time to process information, or those who have memory difficulties can be challenged if information is only presented through sound. So some ways you might offer alternatives for auditory information could be by using text equivalents in the form of captions or voice recognition for spoken language. You might provide visual diagrams or charts or notations of music or sound. You might provide written transcripts for auditory clips. And you could even use visual analogs that maybe represent emphasis or rhythm, like emoticons or symbols or things like that. On the flip side, you've got visual, and visual information we take in very quickly, but it can also be very dense, and it isn't equally accessible to learners with visual disabilities or to people who are maybe not familiar with the type of graphic that's being used. So you can provide non-visual alternatives with descriptions that are either text or spoken for images and graphics and animations. And you can use recorded text to go along with the visual display of the information. Learning materials are often dominated by text, and in an online environment that can be especially true. But text actually can be a weak format for presenting a lot of concepts that are more visual in nature, or for expanding on a lot of processes. Text just doesn't quite do it justice. So you can use multimodal formats to deliver content, like illustrations, simulations, or graphics that can make the text more comprehensible for any of the learners and accessible for somebody who might find it completely inaccessible if it were only in text. You could present key concepts in one form of symbolic representation, for example, an expository text, and then pair that with an alternative form. Might be a video, might be a comic strip, might be an animation, or a physical demonstration or something. For example, a math equation paired with a storyboard or a diagram or a model. So it's in two formats and can really strengthen both formats for your learners. It's important that, whoops, missed that one. It's important that, to ensure symbols and vocabulary are also made very clear. A lot of times as subject matter experts, we forget that the jargon and the vocabulary that's so ingrained in us isn't always clear to our students. So one way to think about the idea of representation is to make sure symbols and vocabulary are very explicitly clear. You can use hyperlinks, footnotes, for definitions or illustrations, or referring back to previous references that made it clear, whatever's appropriate to provide clarification. Okay, now it's your turn again. So thinking about a specific topic or a piece of content or activity in one of your courses, how could you make symbols or vocabulary more clear? How might you present content or even just a key concept in that paired representation format? So text with an illustration or audio with an infographic. And maybe again, how could you increase the collaboration of it? And think about it for a moment. And then if you have an idea pop into mind, go ahead and unmute and let's share. Okay. Did I see someone on? No, no one unmuted. Okay,
I can share.
let that one. Oh, good. Go ahead, Carol.
So I teach PE, and I think a lot of times I'll use videos to show how to do a movement, but I think it would be good for me to also incorporate text descriptions for students that might have an easier time understanding something if they're actually reading it and then they can understand it better versus just looking at it. So
Right, yeah, great.
it's two
Or even a
options.
flow chart or, something
Mhm.
for those students that like that kind of visual. Yeah,
Yes, yeah,
great
definitely.
idea.
I was going to comment on how I've seen some presentations where the presenter really takes the time to describe everything on the screen. So really taking the time to explain, like, this is a picture and it shows a bucket full of apples, because usually you're putting that picture there for a reason. And,
Right.
like, well, the picture is worth 1,000 words. It gets the point across, but you don't always take the time to, like, okay, maybe slow down and make sure that I'm really explaining the significance of this picture, even if it's just a small little image. So that might be something that you could do in an online live setting in a Zoom class, but even an online class, if you're, talking through a PowerPoint presentation that you've recorded, where you can say, I put this picture here for this reason, and this is what the picture is of. And it's, and kind of taking the time to slow down and explain it can, help those people who might not get it right away. And
Right.
for whatever cultural reasons or whatever the case may be, but having that opportunity, then they don't have to be the one to ask the dumb question, right? You're kind of giving them that information.
Yeah, yeah. So cultural or language or even processing, maybe the visuals just don't gel. So getting that sort of audio description can really make it pop for them. Great.
Yeah.
I
Any
like what
other
Chloe
idea
said.
before we, oh, go ahead, Rob.
I like what Chloe said. It's kind of what it's doing. It's controlling the narrative. And I don't mean that from a power standpoint, but from an understanding, like a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So
Right.
it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of us on the screen. We'll have 8 different words for one
Exactly.
picture, right? But if it's not that open box, I was talking about open box earlier, it needs to be that more, okay, this needs to be representative of X. You need to make sure you're explaining that, not just thinking you put it up and that's the way you think of it. And it
Yeah.
also, back to your questions, it made me think some of my technical stuff becomes almost mathematical like when I'm teaching photography, and I do show some illustrations. I like to do that a lot, but I think I need to make sure I bring those in, not just at the beginning and forget to bring them back, but bring those back more often.
Repeatedly, yeah.
Repeatedly. And then anecdotally, you talk about the different types of learners. I had a hearing impaired, so she was at the extreme end where she needed an interpreter in my class. She was a wonderful girl, young lady. And then I showed this movie in class. It's called Baraka. And it's all this visual video imagery, and there could be stills and beautiful composition, and there's this beautiful soundtrack that goes with it, but there's no text. There's a narrative to it, but you have to think about it. So it was over, I said, what'd you think? And the student raised his hand and said, I hated it. And I said, well, why? He said, there were no words, nobody explaining anything. And then she raised her hand and said, I loved it because of that.
Yeah.
And she didn't have to catch up and try to read and do all that. She could just
Right.
watch the visual. She may have heard some of the bass and she got it and she loved it.
That's
It's
great.
amazing to see the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Really nice. Erin, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I teach English, and in some cases it's helpful to be able to kind of like point to particular parts of a sentence or a citation. Like when I teach MLA style,
Yeah.
I would be able to point and be like, here's the author, here's the publisher, and point all that out. And so I've done kind of word art in the past before to have kind of like arrows pointing at things.
Uh-huh.
But
Cool.
when I'm online and asynchronous, I'm not sure if those kinds of images are still accessible to students with visual impairments.
Yeah, there are, and we won't, accessibility is such a big talk, we won't go into that, but yeah, you'd want to make sure, I'd have to see the actual thing to be able to say whether the way you're doing it would work or if there's some other, but yeah, now that it's online, that would be something to be considering. And it may be that you have one format that is visual and another that is text-based, so that both types of students would have equal access to the content, even though it's in different formats.
Okay, so if I have it in those kind of multiple formats, it tends to work.
Yes, the thing with accessibility is as long as one version of something is accessible, you don't have to make all the versions of that same content accessible.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, good. So third category is expression or action. And another way to acknowledge that brains are wired differently is to offer choice in how students demonstrate their mastery of the content. Individuals with movement impairments, significant ones like cerebral palsy, students who struggle with executive function, strategic and organizational abilities, people with language barriers and so forth. They're all going to approach learning tasks very differently than the average learner. Some may be able to express themselves really well in written text, but not speech, and vice versa. So unless specific media and materials are critical to the goal, and in Rob's case, that they may very well be true, something like learning to photograph with a particular type of something, or as a more broad example, learning to paint with oils or learning to handwrite calligraphy, where it's very specific, the media and the materials. If that isn't very specific, it's great to allow a variety of media for expression, such as text, speech, drawing, illustration, comics, storyboards, film, dance, movement, visual art, sculpture, or video. I mean, the list is endless. You can use a variety of evaluation methods as well. Instead of a traditional multiple choice exam, you can encourage students to show their knowledge and skills with essays, projects, portfolios. Instead of having everybody do the same assignment, give them an option to choose between a poster presentation or a research report or creating a Spark video. You could even have them tell you how they're going to demonstrate mastery. So you give them the evaluative criteria, and then they come up with the evaluation method with your approval, of course. So that was a quick one, but if thinking about how you might adjust one of your assignments to give choice and expression, what comes to mind? Doesn't have to be fancy.
Maybe creating an option for students to record a video in a discussion, as well as, typing it in, or
Right.
a video, like encouraging them to either use multiple forms of media or speak if they prefer to speak, or type, kind of giving them that.
Yeah. And that's really a discussion you may want to think about, because then you'd have the accessibility issue of if you had here, but for assignments that are being turned into you, definitely you can say, hey, you may want to write this out, but maybe you want to do a PowerPoint, or maybe you want to present submit a movie to me that is you present, and you can just give them choices in how they're displaying the content of whatever your assignment is. Thanks, Chloe. Any other ideas coming to mind about how you might give them choice in how they're demonstrating mastery?
I have more of a question on that, Helen.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, I guess, and I think I know my own answer, but I guess you'd have to be very careful that one didn't seem, so much easier to accomplish than another's. Like one of my assignments, they need to write a paper, say. I'm sure the English, Aaron does. He must have lots of papers he has to write for English courses. If you have to write a 5-page paper for my history course, and then I said, or you can do a video, or you can do a PowerPoint presentation. It's got to be on caliber of how much work it takes for that 5-page paper, though. So how do you balance that well? That through rubrics, or
Well, yeah, and other people may have ideas, and I think we're doing good on time, so we can chime in on this. But what comes to my mind is the grading criteria isn't how hard it was for them to complete it. The grading criteria is, did they include whatever, or I don't know what your topic is well enough for me to be able to give something concrete, but to not think about it in terms of that, because writing may be really easy for one student and absolutely horrendous for another. And so is that even fair? And so just be thinking about, what is it I want to grade on that isn't determined by the method of expression, but allows students to maybe do it in writing or do a PowerPoint or do a, whatever it is. But they're meeting the learning goals that you want them to be demonstrating in that particular assessment. Did I say that in a way that made sense?
I think so. Thank you. That helped me out a lot, Helen. Thank you.
Yeah. And Joan, you were going to add something?
We did group projects, but I had them write a paper where they were required to do a presentation because it was an assessment project. And if you can explain it, then you understand it. That's the, point of view I come from.
Right.
So sometimes they can do both. The only challenge in that was that I made it a collaborative thing.
Yeah.
I think in my next semester, I'm going to have them do it individually, because how do you get past the challenge of, I know you said we're going to get into groups at another time. You have 2 or 3 students in a group that's doing all the work and then they're like, well, we can't hear from these people. Now we're in the middle of this new Zoom class where they can't meet in person. So you have 2 people out of 5 carrying the group.
Yeah.
So that's another challenge in that process of presenting a PowerPoint and a collaborative effort on a paper.
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's definitely there's no simple answer, and it will depend in part on your style and the content and, whatever you're asking them. But we definitely will be looking at what do you do with the disparity of effort that shows up in group work. But to answer Rob's thing, I think if the activity lends itself to like something you were saying, Joan, where they need to explain it, well, can they explain it in text? Great. Could they explain it verbally? Great. As long as they're explaining it, that's what I want to know.
Joan, can I add, if you mind if I add, Helen?
No, go ahead.
When I was in college, Joan, way back, when we had stone tablets, they, I had my degrees in communications media with a specialization in photography, but my core communications courses were really amazing. And we had a group project, and the professor put us together we had graphic designers, photographers, video, so we had a mix of specializations to do this presentation. But then at the end, the way he graded us was he made the group give the grades out to the group members. So yeah, we've had an A+ presentation, but if there was one member who never showed up, we all threw him or her under the bus because we were given the marking pen.
And of course, Joan, you get to weigh in on that. It's not like you take verbatim but it gives you information that you wouldn't have had if the group didn't weigh in. Yeah. So there's ideas like that we'll definitely talk about when we do the group one. I don't remember the date for it, but it's coming up. Great. Okay. So accessibility is definitely part of universal design for learning. Learners may have vision, hearing, mobility, and/or cognitive challenges. They may have multiple challenges that impact their ability to interact with your content. Much of what we've already spoken of will help reduce barriers for those with cognitive challenges. Not all of it, and depends on the challenge, but a lot of giving the choices will help students who have cognitive issues be able to figure out what's the best way that's going to support their learning. To overcome barriers for other issues like vision, hearing, or mobility, many students use assistive technology, which is just kind of a blanket name for a broad range of devices and software that can be helpful to people with differing abilities. And so to provide the most support for those students, you really want to think about how can I format my content in a way that supports the use of assistive technology? So the main considerations are going to be properly formatted text, both in Canvas and in any external documents. And I know you guys have either had or you will be having accessibility training. We're not going to go into that now, but I'm talking about things like formatting your headings, making sure your lists are using the list tool, that there's alt text for images like we spoke about earlier, meaningful link text, those kinds of things, which are going to support screen reader devices for the vision impaired. You want to make sure you have accurate captions that include punctuation, capitalization, and accurate word matching for videos, and transcripts for hearing impaired learners. And you want to make sure that there is functional keyboard navigation and correct reading order of the page or the slide elements for learners that have mobility issues who aren't able to use a mouse. You know, maybe they're using the sip and puff technology, or they have to navigate using only a keyboard, so they're not able to use a mouse. So in a nutshell, I want to sum up. The principles of universal design for learning are to provide multiple means of engagement. So you're giving students choices that are going to fuel their interests and autonomy. What fires up one student isn't going to fire up another student. You want to make sure you're providing multiple means of representation. So your content and information are being presented in multiple media, and the kinds of supports you're offering are varied as well. You want to provide multiple means of action or expression. So you're giving students plenty of opportunities for demonstrating what they know in different ways, and you're providing models and feedback and support for different levels of proficiency. And you're ensuring that content is accessible to students with vision, hearing, and mobility challenges. This was a pretty broad view of the topic of UDL. To learn more, I would recommend visiting CAST.org. It's an organization that is dedicated to the topic of universal design for learning. They have a membership program. You don't have to become a member to view the website, but if you're interested, membership is free and it gives you access to their really great book, Universal Design for Learning, The Theory and Practice. So that's a little perk if it's a topic that you're interested in diving into more deeply. So that's all I had to share specifically. So let me ask you all, what questions do you have, or did another idea percolate about one of the other engagement, representation, or expression that you want to share? And I'm going to sip my last bit of water while you're thinking. And if you don't have questions, that's fine. But if you do, we can chat. Oh, Joy, thanks for putting that website in the chat.
I guess mine is still percolating.
Yeah,
But
it's
one
a
of
lot.
Yeah. One of the classes I teach focuses on critical thinking, and there's a number of logical fallacies we are responsible for making sure the students know.
Uh-huh.
So in that case, we don't have a lot of choice in which ones I mean, I can add extra ones, but I can't take away from the required list. So I'm still kind of working through how I can make that process a little more autonomous for them.
Yeah. And so maybe like that very first example, you can't choose the learning goal, but you can provide them choice in how they're demonstrating it, or the supports that they're using, video versus text versus, you know, some kind of visual representation to help them actually learn the content. Those would be ways you could provide opportunity for autonomy and choice.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. This is a lot of information, and the whole idea is a big one to wrap your brain around. So the last thing I would recommend is take baby steps. Don't expect yourself to have your course next semester be fully UDL and, you know, it's like, no, just pick one assignment and say, okay, how can I work with this one assignment and think about engagement, representation, and expression, and then just keep building on what you're doing with that. So don't beat yourself up and try to do it all at once. That will defeat the purpose.
What kind of support on campus do the students have? I know they just changed the, from DSPS, they just changed the name of that department, but does that department help with some of that accessibility, that last section you went over? And again, I know this is not accessibility
that's okay.
course, but is, you know, even if they're not DSPS or the new, I forgot the new title, you know, student that has that paper on the first day, can we send them there, you know, and to get some of the software or device or things that would help them, whether, you know, while we're online now or hopefully soon in the classroom, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to let Joy, I mean, I can give you a general answer, but Joy or Chloe could talk about specifics for College of the Canyons.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Rob, you know, definitely send students there. You know, they will still support students even if they don't, like you said, like have the form where they're declaring any sort of
yeah, like an IEP, we call them IEPs. If they don't have an IEP,
exactly,
504.
But they do have, you know, devices and assistive technology. So I know they have, at least when we were face to face, you know, they kind of had like a lab set up for students that students could utilize. So by all means, I would still encourage you to send, you know, direct students there because they do have the resources and the tools to support students, even if they don't necessarily have to explicitly declare to their instructors that they have any sort of disability. The support is there.
Okay.
Another idea just popped into my head. If you include, and I'm hoping you do, a survey about student experience and course design so that students can give you feedback on the design of your course. Maybe one of your questions is there something along the lines of, is there a format delivery or, you know, a method of content delivery that you would like to see more of? And maybe they'll give you some ideas about what would be useful to them. Any other thoughts or questions that we can talk about in the last couple of minutes? I can't tell you the meaning of life, I'm sorry, but maybe around universal design for learning.
Just to Rob's point real quick about directing students to the DSPS office. If you create an orientation letter for your course, the DSPS information will automatically be at the end of your letter. So every orientation letter that students will read, that where they learn about the course, that information also exists there. So just in case you're wondering how students will find their way to the DSPS office, that is one of the ways that they'll get it in your letter. At the end, it'll automatically be populated. So that's one.
Great.
I have a question.
Yes, Joan.
Teaching via Zoom is challenging. I've never had a fully online course. And when I was doing my internship, I was in the classroom, which to me is much easier. I know a lot of people like online, I like person to person. And we're talking about engagement. In my class lectures, I would stop every 5 minutes to ask questions and ask for feedback, which was, you know, because I was so new to this and then thrown into Zoom, you know, instead of being in front of the students. And I just got radio silence. That's why I started giving them the assignment of looking up a current event that was directly related to whatever we were reading in that chapter of the business book. And they would have to start just for 5 minutes to lecture. But how do you get them to talk? You know, how do you get them to participate?
Yeah.
Because
And again,
that's very challenging.
We're going to have a topic specifically on engagement, and part of it will be around Zoom. And it is a growing topic because it is now so much more prevalent than it was before.
Right.
But again, you're on the right track. It's giving them structure is more likely to get response than the open-ended kind of, even what I'm doing, what questions do you have? You tend to get silence because either people are shy or they were zoning out and they suddenly realize, oh, she's asking a question, you know, what did she say? There's all kinds of reasons. So we can talk more about it in the other one, but off the top of my head, and others may have ideas, think about how you can get their response with a limited choice. Maybe it's a survey rather than a what's working. It's tell me 2 things that are working, or, you know, I'm just making it up off the top of my head, but figure out how you can not be too restrictive with the question, but how can you kind of zero in on something so that it's easier for people to respond. And I also think your idea of creating a structure where they need to present is going to help break down some of that shyness and reluctance, because they've already had to do it. And so they're going to be more inclined to ask questions or contribute ideas because the ice has already been broken.
Yeah, Joan, I'm with you. You know, every semester, I've been here about 6 years, and every semester more hands go down, right? There's less and less hands are going up in the classroom. And I blame this because they're just, not because they're doing it in the classroom, but that's their mode of communication. And then they're not with that face-to-face, and becoming less and less better communicators. So then we went to online, and I thought, oh, well, you know, they're going to love this because they're in front of a screen, and now all of a sudden there's black boxes, and they're saying, you know, the consensus is, well, they don't like to be seen. I'm like, what do you mean? They're taking selfies and they're posting pictures of themselves all day long. Yet they're some, you know, I have even less hands going up now. I've got the same 3 students out of 30 every class that are participating, and yeah, it's tough. So, you know, you're not alone, Joan. Just want to at least let you know that, and it's bizarre.
Yeah,
I didn't realize how being present in a classroom, I like that type of education, but now we're having to evolve with the times. And I've never done 100% online, even though I've been trained to do it. But it's just, you know, it's like speaking into a black hole. It's like, do they hear me? You know, are you there? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when you're walking around a classroom, you know, when I did the internship, I had one student was laughing because I would walk to the back of the room and I was talking to the back of them. And he was like, well, you're making me dizzy because I don't know where you are, but I'm just trying to keep them, you know, alive. You can't do that via Zoom.
Yeah.
So I think this is a challenge to all of us.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge for students because it's a dissociative environment where you've got the real world, but you're supposed to focus on this. It's just a weird situation. Erin made a good suggestion. Thank you for mentioning it, that one way is to have them do it in chat rather than verbally, so that for those shy students or language challenge, you know, whatever, they might be more inclined to contribute in the chat. So that's another option.
I was just going to share, and Helen, I hope I'm not sharing too much of what you already have planned when you host the engagement workshop. But I think one of the great things that I've learned so far from Helen was one of the ideas she gave was perhaps providing more of the lecture material actually be some of the things that students accomplish online, so asynchronously, but then have the live meeting be the time where you get to engage together in activities, which might then perhaps encourage more participation. So then it's like you're leveraging technology in a way that maybe you wouldn't be leveraging it face-to-face, but also, you know, it could be a way, in terms of linking this to UDL, it could be providing students an additional opportunity to learn the material in a different way. So if you've presented it online asynchronously, and maybe they are reading a paper or something, or reading something from the textbook, but now you, I don't know, use some tool, like I've seen some instructors use Padlet, which is free and it's anonymous. And, you know, students can then post some things and maybe you build an activity there. Or I've even been in some meetings, which meetings can be kind of boring, but they'll use Kahoots, and it's a fun way to ask a few questions. And then now maybe they're actually learning the material and engaging with it in a different way that actually can spark some better understanding. So it's you've had them kind of do the work, hopefully, you know, before they come to your live session, and then, you know, maybe they'll be more inclined to engage because it's not, I feel in a way that sometimes this shift to teaching through Zoom has almost brought us back to that teacher on a pedestal who's just lecturing out. And it's like, we know that we all are not these empty vessels that are just like listening and waiting to be filled. And I mean, that's boring for any of us. So I loved Helen's idea. It like totally blew my mind. It made me completely rethink like how we even use this online live teaching. We're like, whoa, what if the lecture was actually happening online and then your live time was like activity time, you know, where you would do think, pair, share, or, you know, all those kinds of things where maybe you do that and it might be a little rusty or stale at first, but if
It'll be messy.
yes, you know, but that's part of the like learning, and you know, students are learning it too. But I don't know that that will solve all the problems, but it perhaps could be a way. I don't know. I just loved that she shared that with me. I was like, wow, it kind of got
You
me
ruined my webinar, Joy, but no, I'm kidding.
And
I don't
now
mean
she's
this one. I
teaching
meant that.
also.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a big topic, Joan, and all of us, I think, are aware. It's just, and it's exacerbated by the speed with which we all had to go to this, or many people had to go to this environment that they didn't really want to be in, but we have to be in. So, you know, it's an opportunity and a challenge.
Well, I think the idea that you gave about the survey of the student experience and the course design is a good one because it'll help you with your next class. Now, you put that on the syllabus. Do you give that at the end of the class, or when do you do that?
It generally, you can do it whenever, but generally at the end is a good time because then they've had a chance to experience the entirety of your course and really give you comments about everything. I know some faculty who do it midway through because that has the potential to impact students in this course, whereas at the end, obviously the students in this course, it's not going to, you know, they're paying it forward, if you will. So it really just kind of depends on your goal, and try it and see what works, you know? Well, I'm conscious of the time and I want to thank all of you for being here. This was great. You all contributed beautifully. And I will look forward to seeing you perhaps at another webinar. So thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Helen?
You.